She never heard the door close. That was the first thing investigators would later note, the silence of it, the way a lifetime of trust can be dismantled not with a crash or a scream, but with the soft, final click of a latch being turned from the inside. In the quiet suburban town of Millbrook, where neighbors knew each other's routines and front doors were left unlocked until the evening news, the disappearance of 34-year-old Elena Reeves didn't initially register as a tragedy. It registered, at first, as an oddity. A missed coffee date. A car left in the driveway for 3 days. A text message, sent to her mother, that read simply, "Need space. Don't worry." It was the kind of message a daughter sends when life becomes too much. When the walls close in. It was also the kind of message a daughter sends when someone else is holding her phone. The kind of message designed to buy time, to quiet concern, to push back the tide of search parties and phone calls just long enough for evidence to cool and memories to blur. Millbrook was the sort of place where people still believed in the inherent goodness of their neighbors, where a text like that would be respected, not questioned. And that belief, that small-town trust, would become the very thing that allowed a predator to walk free for weeks while the truth lay hidden beneath the murky waters of the marshlands Elena had once loved to paint. There is a specific kind of quiet that falls over a small town when one of its own vanishes. It is not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of held breath, of curtains drawn a little tighter, of locks turned for the first time in years. In Millbrook, that quiet settled like a fog in the days after Elena Reeves failed to appear for her morning art class. Her students sat in their seats, brushes dry, canvases blank, waiting for the familiar sound of her key in the door, the soft rustle of her bag, the way she would always start class with the same question: "What did you notice on your way here today?" That Tuesday morning, the question went unasked. The substitute teacher who filled and had no knowledge of the half-finished watercolors, no understanding of the careful way Elena nurtured each student's unique perspective. By the end of the week, the principal had made an announcement, the words missing and concern for her welfare hanging in the air like a storm cloud that refused to break. Students wept in the hallways. Parents called the police, demanding answers. But the police, bound by procedure and a lack of evidence, could only say that they were looking into it. Elena Reeves was not the kind of person who vanished. She was the kind of person who anchored others, who planted roots deep and tended them with patience. Born in Millbrook, she had left only for college, a 4-year sojourn at a state university where she studied fine arts and education, returning as soon as she had her degree. She bought the old farmhouse on Willow Lane with money her grandmother had left her. A rambling Victorian with peeling paint and good bones, and she had spent years restoring it room by room. She sanded the original hardwood floors herself, refinished the built-in bookshelves, planted a garden that bloomed from spring until the first frost. Her life was a series of deliberate choices, each one a thread woven into the fabric of the community. She coached the youth art program at the community center, volunteered at the food bank every Thanksgiving, and never missed the annual Millbrook Founders Day Festival, where she would set up a booth and paint children's faces with the same careful precision she brought to her canvases. Her students adored her not because she was easy on them, but because she saw potential in places where others saw only failure. There was a boy named Josh, a sophomore with a stutter and a talent for charcoal sketches that he kept hidden in a notebook under his bed. Elena had coaxed him out of his shell by leaving a blank sketchbook on his desk with a note that said simply, "Show me what you see." By the end of the year, Josh had submitted a series of drawings to a statewide competition and won second place. There was a girl named Marisol, the daughter of migrant workers, who spoke little English but communicated through vibrant paintings of the landscapes she remembered from childhood. Elena had secured a scholarship for her to attend a summer arts program. Writing letters of recommendation that spoke of Marisol's quiet brilliance and unshakable spirit. These were not just students, they were extensions of her purpose. She believed that art was not a luxury but a necessity, a way of processing the world, of making sense of the chaos. And she gave that gift freely, without expectation of recognition or reward. The farmhouse on Willow Lane was a reflection of her soul, warm, orderly, filled with light. The wraparound porch held the swing her father had built when she was 12, a year before cancer took him. The swing had been her refuge as a teenager, a place where she would sit for hours, listening to the cicadas, sketching the oak trees that lined the property. After her father died, she had taken over the upkeep of the house, learning from her mother how to patch plaster, how to reglaze windows, how to coax life back from things that seemed beyond repair. Her mother, Carol, lived 20 minutes away in a small bungalow, and they spoke every day, sometimes twice, the rhythm of their conversations as constant as the tide. Carol knew the names of Elena's students, the progress of her garden, the anxieties that sometimes crept into her daughter's voice in the late hours of the night. She knew, too, about Elena's friendships, the constellation of people who orbited her daughter's life. And at the center of that constellation, brightest and closest, was Mia Delgado. Mia had arrived in Millbrook 10 years before Elena disappeared, fresh from a divorce and a failed career in event planning in the city. She had been hired as the coordinator for the Millbrook Arts Council, a small non-profit that operated out of a converted bank building downtown. Elena had been preparing for her first solo exhibition at the council's gallery, and their introduction was the kind of moment that, in retrospect, seems fated. Mia had walked into the break room where Elena was carefully arranging labels for her paintings, and she had said, "You're the artist everyone's talking about. I can see why. There's something in your work, something quiet. I like it." Elena, who was unused to such direct praise, had blushed, laughed, and offered Mia a cup of tea. That first conversation lasted 2 hours, ranging from art to literature to the peculiar rhythms of small-town life. By the time Mia left that afternoon, they had exchanged phone numbers and made plans for dinner the following week. What followed was a friendship that seemed, to everyone who witnessed it, effortless and deep. Mia was the extrovert to Elena's introvert, the one who could talk her way into any reservation, who could charm a room with a few well-placed words. She was taller than Elena, with dark hair she wore in a sleek bob, a wardrobe of understated black clothing, and a laugh that seemed to fill whatever space she occupied. Where Elena was contemplative, Mia was decisive. Where Elena hesitated, Mia acted. They complemented each other in ways that felt almost cinematic. They traveled together, a week in the mountains, a long weekend in New York to see an exhibition, a trip to Napa that Elena had talked about for years. In photographs, they were always touching, arms around each other, faces tilted toward one another in a way that suggested a shared language no one else could understand. Mia was the first person Elena called when she had news, good or bad. She was the one who sat with Elena in the emergency room when she broke her wrist falling off a ladder while painting her bedroom ceiling. She was the one who brought over bottles of wine after Elena's relationship with a local carpenter ended. Listening for hours as Elena tried to articulate why it had hurt so much. And Elena, in turn, was Mia's anchor. Mia's marriage had been rocky from the start, her husband Victor a quiet, steady man who seemed perpetually baffled by his wife's intensity. Elena was the one Mia confided in about the arguments, the resentments, the growing distance between them. She was the one who urged Mia to seek counseling, to communicate, to try to salvage something that seemed, to outside eyes, already beyond repair. When Mia's mother died unexpectedly of a heart attack, it was Elena who drove her to the funeral, who held her hand through the service, who stayed with her for 3 days afterward, cooking meals and answering calls from relatives who wanted to offer condolences. Their bond was the kind that seemed impervious to time or circumstance, a friendship forged in the crucible of shared experience and mutual dependence, but beneath the surface of that perfect friendship, there were currents that few people saw. Mia's intensity, which Elena had always interpreted as passion, sometimes tipped into something harder, something possessive. She had a way of steering conversations toward her own problems, her own needs, leaving Elena to play the role of listener and comforter. When Elena began seeing David, a fellow teacher at the high school, Mia had been cool, distant, making comments about David's ex-wife, about the complications of dating someone in the same workplace. "You deserve someone who's not entangled," Mia had said, and Elena, ever trusting, had taken the words as concern rather than control. The relationship fizzled after a few months, in part because Elena sensed that Mia disapproved, and Elena's loyalty to her friend was a powerful force. After that, she stopped dating altogether, throwing herself into her work, her art, her friendship with Mia. She told herself it was a choice, that she was content with the life she had built. But there were moments, late at night, when she wondered if the shape of her life was truly her own. The week before Elena disappeared, the Millbrook Arts Council had announced that Elena's second solo exhibition had been selected for a regional showcase. A significant honor that would bring her work to galleries in 3 neighboring cities. Elena was elated, spending hours in her studio, preparing new pieces, talking to Carol about her hopes for the future. She told Mia during their Tuesday evening get-together, the last time anyone would see her alive. They sat on the porch swing, the bottle of Napa wine open between them, the fireflies beginning to blink in the twilight. Elena was animated, talking about the themes she wanted to explore, the new techniques she had been experimenting with. Mia listened, nodding, refilling their glasses. But according to the timeline Mia would later provide, she left around 9 p.m., hugging Elena goodbye, promising to help with the exhibition preparations. Elena walked her to her car, waved as Mia drove away, and then returned to the house. It was the last time anyone would see her face. The phone call to Carol came at 10:15 p.m. Elena was tired but happy, recounting the conversation with Mia, making plans for Carol to come over on Sunday for dinner. "I'm making that lasagna you like," Elena said. "And I want to show you the new pieces I've been working on. They're the best I've ever done, Mom. I can feel it." Carol would later replay that call in her mind 1,000 times, searching for any sign of distress, any hint that something was wrong. There was none. Elena's voice was light, her laughter easy. She ended the call the way she always did, "I love you, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow." It was the last time Carol would hear her daughter's voice. The next morning, at 8 a.m., Carol received a text message from Elena's number. "Need space. Don't worry." Carol read it in her kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt a prickle of unease. The phrasing was wrong. Elena never said "don't worry," she always said "I love you." But Carol told herself she was being overprotective, that her daughter was an adult, entitled to her solitude. She texted back, "Okay, honey. Call me when you're ready." There was no response. She waited. By evening, she had called twice, left voicemails. By the next morning, she had called Mia. "She's probably just overwhelmed," Mia said, her voice smooth, soothing. "You know how she gets before a big show. She'll come up for air soon." Carol wanted to believe her. Mia knew Elena better than almost anyone. If Mia wasn't worried, Carol shouldn't be either, but the silence stretched into a third day, and then a fourth. Elena's car remained in the driveway, a thin layer of pollen settling on the windshield, the tires slightly deflated from disuse. The mail accumulated in the box, a mix of bills and catalogs and a postcard from a former student studying abroad. The garden, which Elena tended with religious devotion, began to show signs of neglect, roses that needed deadheading. Lavender that had begun to sprawl. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor across the street, noticed that the porch light, which Elena always turned on at dusk, remained dark. She mentioned it to Carol when Carol came by on the 4th day to check on the house. "It's just not like her," Mrs. Patterson said, wringing her hands. "She's such a creature of habit. Something's wrong." Carol, her unease now a cold knot in her stomach, called the Millbrook Police Department. The responding officer, Patrolman Harrison, was a young man with 8 months on the force and a tendency to see the mundane in every situation. He took Carol's report, noting that the missing person was a 34-year-old female with no known medical or mental health issues. That she had texted her mother asking for space, and that there was no evidence of foul play. He assured Carol that these cases often resolved themselves, that Elena would likely reappear in a few days with a story about needing to clear her head. He filed the report and went on with his shift. It would be another day before Detective Marcus Webb, who had been on vacation, returned to the station and saw the file on his desk. Webb was a 20-year veteran of the department, a man who had worked homicide in a major city before a family tragedy brought him back to his hometown. He had a reputation for thoroughness, for patience, for a willingness to look past the obvious. He read the file twice. Then picked up the phone and called Carol Reeves. The farmhouse on Willow Lane, when Webb arrived the next morning with a forensic team, was eerily pristine. The morning light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted in the still air. The kitchen was immaculate, counters wiped, sink empty, dish drainer holding a single coffee mug and a plate. The refrigerator contained the usual items: milk, eggs, cheese, a container of leftover pasta, along with a bottle of white wine chilling on the door. In the living room, a stack of art books sat on the coffee table, a bookmark protruding from one. The fireplace was clean, the hearth swept. Webb moved through the house room by room, cataloging details. The bedroom was neat, the quilt pulled tight, pillows arranged just so. The closet held Elena's clothes, arranged by color, a pair of gardening boots on the floor, a row of sundresses hanging near the window. Her purse was by the front door, a simple leather satchel containing her wallet, her keys, a tube of lip balm, and a small sketchbook. The keys, house key, car key, a key to the community center, were in the ceramic dish where she always left them. Webb stood in the entryway, looking at those keys. If Elena had left voluntarily, she would have taken her keys. It was possible she had a spare set, but Carol had told him there was only one spare, the one kept under the ceramic frog by the back steps. He walked outside, found the frog, and lifted it. The key was there, undisturbed, a thin layer of dirt and moss covering it. That meant if Elena had locked the house behind her, she had either used her own keys, which were still in the dish, or she had used the spare and then replaced it under the frog, which seemed unlikely for someone in a hurry to get away. The alternative was that someone else had locked the house from the inside and then left, using the spare key to secure the door behind them. It was a small detail, but it was the kind of detail that Webb had learned to trust. The forensic team processed the house for 6 hours, lifting prints, collecting fibers, photographing every surface. They found no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no blood. The only anomaly was a faint scuff mark on the baseboard near the back door, consistent with a shoe having made contact. It was the kind of mark that could have been there for years, or could have been recent. Deborah, the lead forensic technician, noted that the house was almost too clean, too orderly. "It's like someone went through with a checklist," she told Webb. "There's no clutter, no half-finished projects, no evidence of a person in the middle of their life. It feels staged." Webb nodded. He had felt it too. He began the process of interviewing everyone who had been close to Elena. He spoke to her colleagues at the high school, who described her as dedicated, beloved, and excited about her upcoming exhibition. He spoke to her students, several of whom broke down in tears during the interviews. He spoke to David, the fellow teacher she had briefly dated, who said their relationship had ended amicably and that he had no reason to believe she was in any danger. She was happy, David said. She was finally getting the recognition she deserved. She wouldn't have just walked away from that. Webb also spoke to Carol, who provided a detailed timeline of the days leading up to the disappearance, including the phone call on Tuesday night, the text on Wednesday morning, and the growing dread she had felt when Elena failed to respond. Then Webb spoke to Mia Delgado. She came to the police station voluntarily, dressed in a black sweater, her hair pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed but her voice steady. She brought a folder of printed text messages, a timeline she had prepared, and a list of places she thought the police should search. She told Webb about the Tuesday evening, the wine on the porch, Elena's excitement about the exhibition. She described Elena as tired but happy, and said she had left around 9 p.m. When Webb asked about the text message, Mia nodded. That sounds exactly like her. She hates worrying people. She'd rather retreat than cause a scene. Webb asked about the life insurance policy, which he had discovered through a routine financial check. Mia's expression flickered, just for a moment, before smoothing into something like sadness. "We were like sisters," she said. "We took out policies on each other a few years ago. It was a practical thing. She had no one else, really. Her mother is getting older. She wanted to make sure I would be okay if something happened to her. Webb noted the answer, filed it away, and continued the interview. He asked about the spare key, about who else might have access to the house. Mia shook her head. Just me and her mom. She was very private about her space. When Webb asked if she had returned to the house after 9 p.m. on Tuesday, Mia's eyes widened slightly. No, she said. I went straight home. I was tired. Victor will tell you, I was home by 9:30. Webb thanked her, told her she had been helpful, and watched her walk out of the station. He noticed that she did not look back. The investigation proceeded along two tracks. The first was the public track, searches of the surrounding area, appeals for information, flyers with Elena's photograph distributed throughout the county. The second was the private track, Webb digging into the lives of the people closest to Elena, looking for the cracks that might reveal the truth. He obtained phone records, bank records, credit card statements. He interviewed Victor Delgado, who confirmed that Mia had come home around 9:30 on Tuesday night, but added that she had seemed agitated, pacing the house, making a phone call in the garage that he couldn't hear. She said it was about work, Victor told Webb. But she was upset. More upset than the situation seemed to warrant. Webb asked if Mia had left the house again that night. Victor hesitated. I went to bed around 10:30. She was still up. I don't know if she left after that. I'm a heavy sleeper. It was not an alibi, it was a gap. Webb also looked into Mia's financial situation. What he found was a portrait of a woman living far beyond her means. Credit card statements showed balances near the limit, with minimum payments that consumed a significant portion of her salary. Bank statements showed a series of large cash withdrawals over the previous year, totaling nearly $20,000, with no clear explanation. There was a second mortgage on the house, taken out 6 months earlier, that Victor had not known about. And then there was the life insurance policy, $750,000, taken out 3 months before Elena disappeared, with Mia as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been initiated by Mia, not Elena. The agent confirmed that Mia had handled all the paperwork, that Elena had signed the documents during a visit to Mia's house. And that Mia had paid the first 3 premiums. It was a policy that would pay out upon Elena's death or permanent disappearance, with a waiting period of 7 years if no body was found. 7 years. For a woman drowning in debt, it was a lifeline, but Webb needed more than financial motive. He needed evidence. He revisited the cell phone data, this time with a forensic analyst who specialized in geolocation. The analyst was able to map the movements of both Elena's phone and Mia's phone with greater precision. Elena's phone had been stationary at the farmhouse from Tuesday evening until 8 a.m. Wednesday, when the text to Carol was sent. After that, the phone powered down and was never reactivated. Mia's phone had pinged a tower near the farmhouse at 7:55 a.m. Wednesday, just before the text was sent, then traveled toward her home. But there was a gap. From approximately 1:15 a.m. to 2:02 a.m., Mia's phone had been either turned off or in a dead zone. The dead zone, the analyst noted, corresponded to the rural roads leading into the marshlands, an area of approximately 30 square miles of tidal creeks, reeds, and mudflats. It was the same marshlands Elena had painted, the same marshlands where she had spent countless hours sketching birds and sunsets. It was also the perfect place to hide a body. Webb organized a search of the marshlands, bringing in cadaver dogs, a marine unit, and volunteers from the community. The search lasted 3 days, covering the accessible areas by boat and on foot. The dogs hit on several locations, indicating the presence of decomposition, but the terrain was unforgiving. The tides moved constantly, shifting sediment, erasing traces. One of the dogs alerted strongly near a deep channel accessible only by boat, but the current was too strong for divers to search safely. They recovered nothing definitive, no clothing, no remains, no identification. But the fact that the dogs had shown interest, in multiple locations, told Webb that something was out there. He just couldn't prove it. The case began to attract media attention, first locally, then regionally. A reporter from the county newspaper wrote a profile of Elena, interviewing her students, her colleagues, her mother. The article painted a picture of a woman who was loved and admired, whose disappearance made no sense. It also mentioned Mia, describing her as the devoted best friend who has led search efforts and spoken publicly about her hope that Elena will return. The article included a photograph of the two women together, arms around each other, smiling at a gallery opening. It was the kind of story that tugged at heartstrings, that made people want to help. But it also put pressure on the police department, which had made no arrests and offered few updates. The police chief, facing questions from the town council, urged Webb to move faster. Webb, however, understood that speed was the enemy of truth. He continued to build his case brick by brick. He interviewed Mrs. Patterson again, this time with a photo array that included Mia's car. Mrs. Patterson studied the photos for a long time before pointing to the dark blue sedan. "That looks like it," she said. "I can't be 100%, but the shape, the size, the way the headlights looked. It was late, and I was tired, but I remember thinking it was odd that someone would sit there with the engine running for so long." She estimated the car had been in the driveway from around 11 p.m. until after midnight. When Webb asked if she had seen anyone leave the house, she described a figure in a hoodie, walking quickly to the car and driving away. The figure's height and build, she said, could have matched Mia's. Webb also interviewed several of Elena's other friends, who provided a more complex picture of Mia. One friend, a woman named Sarah who had known Elena since college, told Webb that Mia had always been possessive of Elena, discouraging her from other friendships, making snide comments about anyone who got too close. She wanted Elena all to herself, Sarah said. And Elena let her. She was loyal to a fault. She didn't see what the rest of us saw. Another friend, a fellow teacher named Lisa, said that Mia had been jealous when Elena started dating David, and that she had made several comments about David being not good enough and trying to take Elena away. "I think Mia saw Elena as hers," Lisa said. "Not in a romantic way, but in a way that was just as intense. She needed Elena to need her. And when Elena was happy and independent, Mia couldn't handle it." Webb took this information and combined it with the financial evidence, the phone data, the neighbor's testimony. He had enough to obtain a warrant for a more thorough search of Mia's property, including her car. The search of the car yielded a small but significant piece of evidence. In the trunk, under the spare tire, forensic technicians found a single strand of hair that was later matched to Elena through mitochondrial DNA analysis. It was not conclusive proof of foul play. Elena had been in Mia's car many times, but it was a piece of the puzzle. More damning was the search of Mia's home computer, which revealed that she had searched for information about the Marshlands, including tide charts and access points, in the days before Elena disappeared. She had also searched for how long does it take for a body to decompose in water and life insurance payout for missing person. The searches were incriminating, placing Mia at the computer, planning something that went far beyond the concern of a grieving friend. When Webb confronted Mia with this evidence, she lawyered up immediately. Her attorney, Harold Finch, arrived at the station within the hour and advised her not to answer any further questions. But the damage was done. The investigation now had a clear suspect. And the district attorney's office began preparing a case for the grand jury. The indictment for second-degree murder came down 3 months after Elena disappeared. Mia Delgado was arrested at her home, handcuffed in front of her husband, who stood in the doorway with an expression of shock and disbelief. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The devoted best friend, the woman who had organized search parties, who had spoken at press conferences, who had comforted Carol Reeves, was now accused of being the one who had taken Elena's life. The trial began 8 months later, in a courtroom packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Helen Morrison, built its case on a foundation of circumstantial evidence that she argued formed a web from which there was no escape. She called Detective Webb to the stand, who walked the jury through the timeline, the inconsistencies in Mia's statements, the cell phone data, the neighbor's testimony, the financial motive. She called the forensic technician who had found the hair in Mia's trunk. She called the digital forensics expert who had recovered the incriminating search history from Mia's computer. And she called Carol Reeves, whose testimony brought the courtroom to a standstill. Carol sat in the witness box, her hands folded in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. She told the jury about her daughter. About the phone call on Tuesday night, about the text that didn't sound right. She described the weeks of waiting, the search parties, the vigils, the slow, grinding erosion of hope. She described the moment she learned that Mia had been arrested, the way the world seemed to tilt, the way she had to sit down because her legs wouldn't hold her. "I loved Mia like a daughter," Carol said, her eyes fixed on Mia, who sat at the defense table with her head bowed. "I trusted her. Elena trusted her. And she took everything from us." The prosecutor asked if Carol had anything else to say. Carol paused, took a breath, and then spoke directly to Mia. "I hope every day you spend in prison, you think about what you did. I hope you see Elena's face every time you close your eyes. Because I do. And I always will." The defense, led by Harold Finch, argued that the case was built on speculation, not evidence. He pointed out that there was no body, no murder weapon, no forensic evidence linking Mia directly to a crime. He argued that the hair in the trunk could have been transferred innocently, that the internet searches were the result of a friend trying to understand what might have happened, that the financial motive was exaggerated. He called character witnesses who testified to Mia's kindness, her devotion to Elena, her grief in the weeks after the disappearance. He suggested that Elena had indeed chosen to disappear. That she was alive somewhere, starting a new life, and that the police had focused on Mia because they needed someone to blame. It was a bold strategy, but it struggled to account for the lies Mia had told, the inconsistencies in her timeline, the sheer weight of the circumstantial evidence. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. The foreman read the verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Mia Delgado showed no emotion as the judge sentenced her to 25 years to life, the maximum allowed under state law. She was led away in handcuffs, her dark hair swinging, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. She did not look at Carol. She did not look at the reporters. She walked out of the courtroom and into the rest of her life as a convicted killer. The Marshlands kept their secret. Despite additional searches in the years that followed, Elena's body was never recovered. Carol Reeves visits the farmhouse on Willow Lane whenever she can, standing in the overgrown garden, talking to the silence as if her daughter can still hear her. The house was sold a few years ago to a young couple who didn't know its history, who painted the walls and planted new flowers and filled the rooms with the sound of children laughing. But for those who lived in Millbrook at the time, the story of Elena Reeves and Mia Delgado is never far away. It is told in hushed voices at coffee shops, in the high school where Elena taught, in the gallery where her paintings still hang. It is a story about trust and betrayal, about the masks people wear, about the darkness that can hide behind a smile. Because the last person Elena Reeves trusted was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. It was not an ex-lover nursing a grudge. It was not the faceless monster we imagine in our nightmares. It was her best friend. The one who sat beside her on the porch swing, who drank wine with her under the stars, who listened to her hopes and her fears and her dreams. The one who smiled at her, hugged her, and then, in the quiet hours of the night, became the architect of her disappearance. If there is a lesson in the silence of that locked farmhouse, in the lingering image of a car idling in the driveway with its headlights on, it is this: trust is sacred, but it is not blind. The people closest to us hold the greatest power to wound us. And sometimes, the greatest danger is not the enemy at the gate, but the friend within the walls. Thank you for listening to this story on Behind the Crime Files. If you found this narrative compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a deep dive into the cases that haunt us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Elena's place? Until next time. Stay vigilant, and remember, the truth is often hiding in plain sight.